At the threshold of my 18th year, my stepsister commandeered the limelight by revealing her pregnancy, and in a twist of retribution, I orchestrated my own dramatic comeback by getting engaged at her wedding a few years later. I had celebrated my 18th birthday surrounded by family, and now at 21 I confess that I never truly moved past that fateful day, a truth that has brought me to this moment. My world was once composed solely of my father, my stepmother, and my stepsister Vicky, now 23. My father wed my stepmother 5 years ago after 3 years of courting, which means Vicky and I have shared nearly 8 years of existence. My own mother passed away soon after I was born, leaving only my dad and me in those early days. If he ever dated during my childhood, it is blurred into oblivion, or perhaps it never happened at all. I recall the day, at 13, when he sat me down to recount the tale of a remarkable woman he'd been seeing for several months before introducing me to both my new wife and Vicky. While my stepmother was tolerable, Vicky and I clashed immediately from the moment our eyes met. At 15 she launched a salvo of biting remarks about my appearance. First came the cruelty aimed at my looks, then the jabs about my lack of a boyfriend, my sparse circle of friends, and a litany of other shortcomings as my stepmother moved in and Vicky began attending the same high school as I did. Matters worsened when I learned that Vicky's father was still alive, while her divorced mother, who had met my dad through work, shared custody with him after their split, meaning Vicky spent half her month with her dad. I remember the odd relief I felt on those days when she wasn't around, for her mere presence stirred a relentless tempest of provocation that I, an introvert who craved solitude, could barely endure. I never quite understood why she felt compelled to pounce on me every time. When she turned 18 and left for college, I rejoiced at the thought of finally reclaiming my space, a chance to breathe and live in a home free from her constant disruption. Yet every other weekend, as Vicky returned, I would retreat into the sanctuary of my room, spending those brief periods in isolation while everyone else celebrated her fleeting homecoming from college. Despite her visits nearly every alternate weekend, which were maddeningly frequent, I kept silent. I did not want to appear jealous or an attention seeker. Over the years, neither my father nor my stepmother ever acknowledged the relentless bullying or the gradual transformation of my spirit into one of quiet sorrow whenever Vicky was near. Perhaps they noticed but simply chose not to care. Then, during her second semester, Vicky shifted from her dorm to an apartment she rented with her longtime boyfriend, a partner she'd known since freshman year. Though they had been forced by college circumstances to maintain separate abodes, they soon merged their lives under one roof. My 18th birthday arrived amid grand celebration. My dad spared no expense, hiring live jazz musicians whose sultry tunes filled the air, a nod to my niche passion for jazz. The night brimmed with invitations to school friends, cousins, and a scattering of other relatives, and I basked in the glow of being the center of attention, despite the unwelcome presence of Vicky and her boyfriend. But just as I was about to slice into the cake, following the soulful finale of a jazz number and the extinguishing of my birthday candles, Vicky's throat cleared sharply. She announced that she had important news, a revelation meant to dazzle us all. Instantly, the room fell into a stunned silence as every eye turned toward her, trying to decipher what was unfolding. Then, without pause, she declared that she and her boyfriend were expecting a baby. For a relentless 15 minutes, the celebration morphed into an ovation for her announcement, while I stood dumbfounded with a plastic knife in my trembling hand. My friends rushed to console me, yet their comfort felt hollow when even my own father, overcome with emotion, embraced Vicky and her boyfriend with tearful congratulations, though he bore no biological connection to the unborn child. In that moment, I felt like a discarded extra on the stage of my own big day, a day that had been stolen from me. The aftermath left me seething. Not only had I been robbed of the right to cut my own cake, but every well-meaning gesture, friends urging Vicky to share the cake with me, confirmed that she had deliberately hijacked my thunder on the one day meant solely for me. It was on that day my heart hardened against her irrevocably. Though our relationship had never been warm, her act on my birthday transformed a simmering dislike into outright loathing, and I soon found myself responding in kind. Before that day, I had swallowed her insults silently, but afterwards, every remark ignited explosive, heated arguments that only ended when one of our parents intervened. During her pregnancy, while she continued her studies and returned home only a month before her due date, I deliberately refused any support, choosing instead to ignore her as if she were a ghost in my life. When she gave birth and quickly retreated back to her apartment with her boyfriend, the bitter taste of that stolen day lingered. Nearly 3 years later, when she announced her engagement to her longtime partner, I began plotting my own elaborate act of revenge, a counterstrike for the devastation of my birthday. I had been in a committed relationship with my boyfriend for 2 years, a bond so strong that, upon hearing of her engagement, I resolved to stage a grand gesture at her wedding, mirroring the audacity with which she had claimed my special day. I shared my plan with my boyfriend, and understanding the deep scars left by Vicky's behavior, he agreed wholeheartedly. Then, 3 days before Vicky's wedding, after the ceremony and speeches had barely settled, he seized the microphone before anyone else could, and proposed to me in front of the entire assembly. The room erupted in applause and joy. Everyone celebrated our engagement except my parents and, naturally, Vicky along with her new husband. In the midst of the jubilation, many relatives came forward to offer their congratulations, and even a few of Vicky's friends and co-workers extended heartfelt wishes. I was overjoyed by the success of our plan and the realization of my engagement, while Vicky's expression darkened into a permanent scowl for the rest of the event. My dad, stepmom, and Vicky's husband looked as if they had just been forced to suck on a bitter, sour lemon, and I savored that bitter justice, for they had never uttered a word when Vicky had commandeered my 18th birthday. This was pure tit for tat. Yet, the day after the wedding, my father called to express his disappointment over my behavior. He argued that my boyfriend should have sought permission from Vicky before proposing at her wedding, a detail that, by design, was meant to be a surprise. My father insisted that we should have asked beforehand to ensure that the couple was comfortable with our audacious plan. I fired back that Vicky had never sought my consent before announcing her pregnancy on my birthday, so why should I have any obligation now? He argued that a wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event, unlike a birthday that recurred annually, and that my actions were unjust. I lost my temper and reminded him of the 8 long years of Vicky's relentless cruelty, a history he had always ignored. Though I felt no remorse for my retaliatory act, my father demanded that I apologize, warning that without an apology the family would never speak to me again. I couldn't understand the injustice, and in my fury I abruptly ended the call. It was a bitter irony. When Vicky tormented me, my family remained silent, yet when I finally fought back, I was suddenly cast as the villain, even though that birthday wound still stung. Am I the villain for having my boyfriend propose at my stepsister's wedding simply because she usurped my moment on my 18th birthday? Update 1. I have yet to apologize because I firmly believe I am not at fault. The reactions online have been mixed, some defending my actions and others condemning them, but honestly, I feel nothing but resolve. I refuse to say sorry, especially not to Vicky. My father has stopped speaking to me, and my stepmother aligns with him, yet I am indifferent. They have always chosen Vicky over me. It is no shock that my stepmother supports her, but my father's choice has struck me to my core. I had always suspected this outcome, having watched in silence as they allowed Vicky to trample over me during our formative years. In truth, I feel I lost him long ago, the moment he chose to ignore my unhappiness when he married and brought Vicky into our lives. Now, my boyfriend is my only pillar of support, and I am profoundly grateful for him. Contrary to what some assume, he had no qualms about the proposal. We will still celebrate properly with an intimate gathering of true friends and family, likely limited to his side given the present circumstances. Update 2. Today, my grandparents, my father's parents, called to discuss the wedding fallout. Their words echoed my dad's earlier sentiments, but I cannot fathom why they have now inserted themselves into this ordeal. It has been over a week since the wedding, and Vicky has yet to speak to me. After my father's initial attempt to force an apology, I've been entirely cut off from the family. I was startled when my grandparents, with whom I have never been close, began to question my behavior. I told them squarely that this was none of their business, and in response, they accused me of disrespect, promising an argument that I simply could not endure on an already rough day. Their intrusion only reminded me how unjust it all is, my own family favoring someone who isn't truly mine over me. Vicky has always been kind to everyone except me, so in a twisted way it makes sense that they would side with her. Though I have long been a solitary soul, it still hurts that they choose her over me. The events of the wedding were petty and cruel. Even if she claimed it was just a single day of overblown drama, her lifetime of bullying since I was 13 has left scars that no apology can erase. Now, even my normally detached grandparents are demanding that I apologize, as if justice were so simple. It is absurd and utterly unfair. While deep inside I miss my father terribly, I feel powerless to change how they see Vicky. Update 3. It has now been 3 weeks since the wedding fiasco and 3 weeks since I last spoke to my father. He has blocked my number on all social media, severing any means of contact, and when I discovered this, I sank into a day of quiet despair. There's nothing I can do to mend this rupture, and I refuse to apologize to Vicky merely to coax my father back. Yet today he came to see me, accompanied by my stepmother, Vicky, and her husband. At first, I didn't even want to let them in. I knew they were here to rekindle old conflicts and stir up trouble long after the storm had passed. My father's insistence forced me to open the door, partly to avoid the judgment of neighbors, and thankfully my boyfriend was there to bolster me, ensuring I wasn't alone. They wasted no time. Within minutes Vicky began yelling, accusing me of ruining her wedding and making it all about myself. For an excruciating 15 minutes, she screeched at the top of her lungs, denouncing me as selfish, cruel, and mean, claiming she had learned from my father that I had retaliated solely because she stole my limelight on my birthday. She dismissed her own actions as trivial, yet magnified mine into a monumental betrayal fueled by a thirst for attention. Anyone who truly knows me understands that it wasn't just that one birthday. Years of relentless bullying since I was 13, each cutting remark chipping away at my self-worth, had led me to this breaking point. If I struck back even once, then by all accounts she deserved it completely. I refused to let her invade my space without resistance, and soon our heated exchange escalated into a shouting match so fierce that my boyfriend had to physically restrain me. I was mere inches from her, and I swear that if he hadn't held me back, I might have actually struck her. The confrontation spiraled until my father intervened, separating us and then launching into a sermon about how disappointed he was in our immature, reckless behavior. He insisted that we both were acting foolishly and demanded that we apologize to each other to mend our fractured family. That might have worked in our teenage years, but now it felt hollow. My father, who had never once stood up for me when Vicky bullied me, suddenly wished to play the peacemaker now that his beloved stepdaughter was on the receiving end. I saw through the act. His true motive was to guilt me into apologizing so they could resume their old ways of trampling over my feelings. I told him I was more disappointed in him than he was in me, and that if he wished, he could simply pretend I never existed. I watched as his face shifted from irritation to sorrow when I declared that his return was driven solely by guilt, that he didn't truly care if I was happy with the family he'd chosen. He only wanted things to appear normal so he wouldn't have to face the fact that he had made me miserable alongside Vicky. At least Vicky and her stepmother owed me nothing, for they were never my true kin, but he did, and he had let me down time and time again. When my stepmother tried to interject, I silenced her, insisting that since she had remained silent for so many years while her own daughter bullied me, now was not the time for her voice. Vicky, after a long moment of glaring while her husband tried unsuccessfully to calm her, eventually left, making sure, even as she departed, to hurl one last spiteful remark that their entire visit had been a waste of time and that had she known what was coming, she should never have come. I couldn't help but agree inwardly, secretly relieved that she had chosen to exit, for her presence only fueled my anger further. After she left, my father and stepmother lingered for a few more minutes as my dad attempted to remind me of the importance of family and decry my act of retaliation as utterly misguided. I told him he could either accept that he had never truly been a good father or we could continue this pointless argument. In the end, he left, disappointed, and I realized that in our family, disappointment is a cycle, each of us letting down the other until nothing remains but a bitter stalemate. Exhausted by the day's events, I found solace in my boyfriend, whose support allowed me to vent freely while stepping in only when the situation threatened to spiral completely out of control. He respects me in a way that no one else ever has. As for why I continue to call him my boyfriend even after our engagement, it's merely a quirk of habit. The change feels so enormous that, to me, he remains the same man I always loved. Update 4. A few days ago, my boyfriend and I formally became engaged, and today we held a small engagement party for our dearest friends and family. Aside from one cousin and a handful of other relatives who could attend on such short notice, many of those I invited were unable to come. I deliberately did not invite my parents. They wouldn't have felt any remorse anyway, not after the monumental fallout with them and Vicky, which has left them silent for a week now. I accept that silence, and it allowed us to celebrate with those who truly matter. My dad did send an email congratulating me after spotting the photos online, a reminder that some family ties remain intact among other relatives who haven't cut me off. In his message, he mentioned he would have loved to be there under different circumstances, a remark that stung, as it implied he still wished I hadn't picked a fight with Vicky. That note infuriated me, but I chose not to reply. I wasn't about to let anyone ruin my hard-won peace. I simply thanked him and moved on, returning to a quiet movie night with my boyfriend, though now, I suppose, I must start calling him my fiancé. The proposal at the wedding had felt like a placeholder after all that had transpired. Later, he surprised me by renting an entire restaurant, filling it with my favorite songs, creating an evening so beautiful and intimate that I want to keep it private. For that night, every worry melted away, and I was overwhelmed with gratitude for having chosen him and for him choosing me in return.